Hi, everybody. This is Brett Atterbury, and today I'm honored to have with me our own Ann Dilker. Hello, Ann.
Hi, Brett. Boy, it's really a lot of fun to be on the other side of the microphone here.
I was thinking the same thing. This must be strange for you. Usually, you're the one asking the questions, and now I'm going to be asking you the questions.
Yeah, that would be cool. Shoot away.
Yeah. The reason why is everyone is, Ann is usually the one interviewing for us, interviewing jewelry designers, but Ann, of course, if you didn't know, is herself a jewelry designer and is very involved in all kinds of jewelry making. So, as always, we want to give to you opportunities to listen to talented jewelry designers, their backgrounds, how they approach things, and you'll learn a lot from Ann today. So with that, let's jump right in. Are you ready, Ann?
Boy, I hope I can live up to that intro.
Was that a little overboard? I'm sorry about that.
Well, I'll try.
All right. First of all, interesting. Your company's name is Moss Hollow Pottery, and for a jewelry designer, that certainly sounds a little bit like a strange name. So, could you kind of tell us how that came about?
Yeah, sure. I sort of sneaked into jewelry design kind of through a back door. I had been a studio art potter for a number of years until the market fell out for art in general and art pottery specifically. And I was fortunate enough to have a really good friend, Joe Miller of Joe Miller Porcelain, who said, "Hey, well, why don't you make some beads?" And I was sort of like, well, and I don't know about that because I never made jewelry, but let me give it a shot. I didn't have anything to lose. So I started making beads and met a whole group of people, and I'm just having a ball with it. So I never changed the name of the company. I just stayed with Moss Hollow Pottery, thinking maybe someday I would change it, but I probably won't.
Well, it's probably you're too well known now among your customers. If you changed over, it would probably throw them off, I would imagine.
Yeah, and that's the fear. So that's why it's going to stay Moss Hollow Pottery.
Yeah. Okay, so you got involved with porcelain beads, and now I see that you're doing a lot of work with kumihimo. And how'd you go from one to the other?
Well, that was a function of making porcelain beads. What a lot of people don't realize is that porcelain fires hotter than glass. So even borosilicate glass usually fires somewhere in the, you're working on a torch, it's in the 1500, 1700 Fahrenheit, range. When you're working with pottery, it's usually 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's really, really hot. And when you're firing a bead, if it has any weight to it, it has to be placed on a nichrome rod. There are very few metals that can handle that high temperature. So by the time you put a fairly heavy bead on a rod and it goes up to those temperatures and it's going through all of its chemical transformation, the hole in the bead ends up being fairly large. It's usually about 2.5 millimeters. And so when I first put my beads out there, everybody would say, these are really pretty, but I don't know what to do with them because they didn't hang on a piece of beading wire the way most beads did. And understand that this was 7 or 8 years ago. This was before Tierra Cast and a few of the other ones came out with their big hole bead findings to sort of stabilize these things.
Mm-hmm.
So I just said, well, gee, what am I going to do? And I already knew how to tie knots and I knew how to braid, and I knew how to do all of these textile things. So I thought, well, I'll just put my beads on braids. And little did I know that kumihimo would take over my entire life. But it did, and it's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah. And I know a lot of the folks listening, they've seen you on jewelry television, but I'm curious how much time now, when you spend time, you do a lot of things. You design, you certainly do a lot of teaching and instruction, and of course you're developing some of your own products as well. I mean, how much of your time are you spending doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Right now, I don't think I have actually designed anything for the last 2 or 3 years. Most of what I do is put pieces together to teach a technique. I've been running so fast in terms of trying to keep ahead of the curve with kumihimo and with the macrame that I find myself designing to the technique rather than designing for the design itself. And it's something that I really, really miss. And I do hope to get back to that this year. That's part of the plan.
Okay. Well, you've been doing a lot of kumihimo, so you're involved in that. Has it opened up some doors for you? How has it helped you?
It's so funny. It's like if you find yourself in a situation where you're kind of testing waters and you're open to the things that come your way, good things can happen. And what happened for me was when I started teaching kumihimo to jewelry designers, they were interested enough that they wanted to go forward with it, but there were no books in English. Everything was done in Japanese. And even though those books were easy to follow because, it was sort of like the red arrow, follow the bouncing ball, they were a little bit intimidated just by not being able to read the text. And so I was going out to Tucson one year and thought, well, I can probably put a little book together. And I only had 4 months from the time I thought, well, I can put a little book together to the time I needed the little book. And the real problem with that is you can't work with an editor or a publisher, so then you have to publish yourself. And when you don't know what you're doing, it can be scary. But I just sort of stepped off the deep end and did that. And writing that first little book, which is Braiding for Beaders, and notice that I didn't use the name kumihimo in the title of that book, because 8 or 9 years ago when I first put that out, kumihimo was a sort of exotic name, and it kind of scared the beading community as to what it was. So I called it Braiding for Beaders.
Sure. I mean, it's not an English word, right? No one's going to head over to Google and just type in kumihimo out of the blue, right?
Well, the thing of it is, even if you went over to Google in those days and typed in kumihimo, you didn't get very many hits, and they were all Japanese.
Okay.
And mostly they went back to Makiko Tada, who is a world-renowned kumihimo braider, or to Hamanaka, which is a textile arts house out of Japan. But what really happened, it was great. The book sold well, which was good because I had made a financial commitment on that at a time when I was sort of in financial trouble, and so that worked out real well for me. But my thought was, let me clean this thing up, and I'm going to send it over to La Cise, which is a textile arts house in Berkeley, California, or to the Beadsmith, which is in New Jersey. And for those of you who are listening to this for the first time, I live in Pennsylvania, so New Jersey's a real close trek for me. But I didn't even have to do that. I really lucked out. I took it to the April Bead Fest when I got back from Tucson in March or whatever it was. And one of the guys from the Beadsmith was walking the show, and he picked this book up and said, "Hey, we'd like to distribute for you." I mean, how great is that?
Yeah. That's the dream, right?
It's like you're just standing there thinking, well, I guess I don't have to figure out how to contact these guys.
Yeah.
And then what happened was after they distributed the book, and I gave them the exclusive rights on distributing that, they asked me to work on a line of kumihimo boards for them. We did the boards. Then it was, hey, can you work on some kits? Let's do some new products. And it's been really an interesting journey for me.
What's so neat, and like you said, it started when you just made the decision to actually put yourself out there and do something. And we know so many people will come up with great ideas, but that's kind of where it dies. On paper, they don't actually take the first step and execute something, and you just went ahead. You had no idea what would happen, but you just went ahead and put it out there, and look what's happened.
Yeah, it was a scary sort of thing because, here I am new to this jewelry making industry. I've never written a book before. I had no idea what I was doing. But I just knew that I had a technique that enough women had expressed interest in that I thought, well, let's give it a try. And I got lucky.
That's great. Well, you made your own luck, I would say.
Well, there's that too, I guess.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about, I noticed that there's a new product that you've worked with, with the Beadsmith guys. Can you talk a little bit about that?
On the macrame board?
Yes.
Yeah, this is another thing that was kind of funny. I've always worked with knots. In fact, I do the really elaborate decorative knotting, the Chinese knotting, the Celtic knotting, the things you would think of as focal pieces. And so one of the days when I was over at the beadsmith talking with them about kumihimo, I said, "Oh, by the way, I have this idea for a macrame board. Would you be interested?" And I outlined what my thoughts were. And they said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, sure. Let's work on that." And so they were great and invested all of the money in the development of this board.
Mm-hmm.
They did the initial schematics on it. They sent it to their factories to get the prototypes back to me. And all I had to do was play around with it and say, well, I think we need to change this or we need to adjust that. And it was just, again, it's one of those things where you just kind of fall into it, and it's worked out really, really well.
Well, it's fantastic, but again, I would say you're being a little modest. You fell into it, but you were the one that came up with the idea and didn't just let it sit in your mind. You actually went out and talked to somebody about it, right?
True, true. And the thing the thing snowballed to the point of where I guess it was just the prototype came in about maybe 10 months ago or so. And then we finalized it. And as we were working on it, we realized that it was probably going to be successful. So they asked me if I would be interested in applying for a patent on it.
Okay.
And that's a different sort of scenario too.
Yeah, another new world for you, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was kind of fun. So yeah, I am now the proud patent holder of a macrame board. It's kind of strange.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so as you know, having been on the other side, we like to keep these fairly short. So I have one more question for you.
Okay.
We work with and we try to help a lot of aspiring jewelry designers, and there are many out there all over the world. And you now having been through so much of this process, of course, there are many things, a lot of advice that you could give to help them. But, from your perspective, looking at trying to help an aspiring jewelry designer, if there was one piece of advice you could give them of something they could do starting right now, today, to move their businesses to the next level, what would that thing be?
I would say that it would be focus on the money. Mm-hmm. This is what I do for my sole means of support. So everything that has happened for me is basically based on keeping a roof over my head and putting food on the table. Okay. And you can't do that if you're out sort of running around in circles or chasing pie in the sky dreams. So it helps me every single time I find myself with more projects on the table than I can possibly deal with in the time that I have. So when I try to prioritize those products, the very first question, or those projects, the very first question that I will ask myself is, what's going to give me the biggest bang for my buck? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's focusing on the long term, and sometimes that's focusing on the shorter term. Where's the profit? Yeah. Not so much the top line revenue, but where's the profit? So what I would say to every jewelry designer out there is focus, analyze your business so that you know where your profit is coming from. Not so much your top line income, but your bottom line profit. And really concentrate on driving those designs. It sounds simple, but that's really what it's all about. It's almost follow the money.
Yeah, and I really like that because having worked with many artists, I think the difficulty a lot of times is they want to be a business person on the one hand and an artist on the other hand, but a lot of times their heart's going to move towards the artist part, and the way they prioritize around the artist part is not necessarily the best thing to do for their business. So as you're suggesting, to have that discipline and say, hey, I am a business person and this is about, yes, there's the artist part, no doubt, but yes, this is a business and I have to make sure that this business not only survives that it thrives.
Right.
And the suggestion that you gave, I think, is a great process, a great discipline that every business user should implement.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it. And this was fun for me to be on this end of the microphone instead of just the man behind the curtains. But I'll be happy to hand this back over to you very soon.
Okay. Thanks, Brett.
All right, Ann. Thank you very much.
Bye now.
Goodbye.